This chapter is called School. School in Newton began almost as soon as the town began, and went through a succession of buildings from house to house the school. From a one-room log school to a rock building, which went through a series of remodelings and additions until 1907, when the people of the little town voted to tax themselves to build a brand new building to cost $10,000. This was a major commitment to the necessity of education in a struggling, small, isolated community. The students entered this two-story brick building in January of 1908. Less than 3 years later, I would inherit that commitment and enter that virtually new building, which the editor of a Logan paper had called the largest and best equipped schoolhouse in Cache County outside of Logan. 2 months after its opening, the Cache County schools were consolidated, and the people very reluctantly turned over their new building to the district, which in turn would assume the rest of the debt and the entire financing of the schools from then on. I have always felt that what went on inside the classrooms of that building was easily as good as the quality of the building, at least during the 8 years that I was there, and I'm sure it continued. When I first marched with my first grade class through those big doors into our room, and we found there Anna May Ralph, a treasure of childhood. She was an older lady, a widow with the aura of a mother. I loved school from that first day, and I loved to learn, which love I still have 80 years later. All the rest of my school life, I remember how I counted the days until the school year started and was sad when it closed in the spring. It was a major disaster in my life when I knew that my school days were over. I would soon realize, however, that my education did not depend entirely on a formal, organized school. It would depend on me, and on books, and libraries, and an occasional teacher or speaker in a class of one kind or another, and the antennas in my head that I could sensitize would pick up the signals. It may be crumbs from the rich man's table. I'm talking now about the fact that I went through high school, but I only had 1 year of college. It may be crumbs from the rich man's table, but they've been cake crumbs. I remember the day when Mrs. Ralph gave us each a real book. I'm not sure what the magic was, nor the process used to enable me to read the 5 words on that first page. Come away, come and play. I can only remember how I felt, and that is hard to describe, except that now it seems just like unlocking a door. And the next day we turned the page. Rain, rain, go away, come again another day. From that day to this, I have had 100 to read, and few are the days that it hasn't been satisfied. Before the year was out, I was reading stories to other children in the class. So the powers that be decided to promote me. One day my teacher gave me a piece of paper, a pencil, and a ruler. I was to make a rectangle 2 inches by 3 inches. I knew how to measure, but when I came to that last corner, the lines didn't meet, and I was demoted back to my former grade. In parentheses, sometime in the early 1980s, I took a class in making patchwork quilts. I had to make a piece 2 inches by 3 inches. The result was just the same as when I was a little girl just beginning in school, and I put my pencil down and I thought about it. Incidentally, I decided not to make patchwork quilts. Mrs. Ralph only stayed at the Newton School a few years, then went on to other schools, finally ending up for years at the Lincoln School in Hyrum, Cache County, Utah. And it was there I would catch up with her in the fall of 1925 and become her colleague for the next 3 years until I left to get married. And so we both taught in the same school. I had just turned 11 years and I was ready for the 5th grade. Mama called me to her where she was reading the newspaper. "Well, it looks like you'll be having a man teacher this year," she said, and showed me the roster of teachers for the Cass County schools for the coming year. My teacher would be Amos Griffin, fresh out of college and a Navy Newton. As if it's scary, but it needn't have been. He was a major influence in my life for the final 4 years of my elementary grades. From him, I also caught an enthusiasm for learning and striving to achieve. He had me always in a seat at or near the front, near his desk. Those were the days when the whole school lined up in front of the schoolhouse, grade by grade, and each child in his or her own place in line. The principal would call for attention, motion to the girls at the piano inside, and we marched into our desk, stood at attention, then the call, turn, be seated, about face. No, it was the other way around. It was turn, about face, and be seated. And we were ready for work. To leave the room, the action was just reversed, and we stood again in our places, out front until a principal said, "About face, dismissed." And it was sometime when I was teaching in Hyrum that this military action was discontinued. I didn't mind the discipline of it, and I loved marching to the music. I loved it more when I got to make the music and learn 2 or 3 marches by heart. And then one day that was all over. A good thing way back in 1919 bowed to the advance of technology. Mr. Griffin, with a smile on his face, pushed an upright Victorola, or was it a Gracchinola, into the room. It could have been either. One was put out by the Victor Talking Machine Company and one by the Columbia Recording Company. And those companies both became recording companies later. Those early companies are still around today as RCA Victor and the Columbia Broadcasting Company. I could be mistaken about this, but anyway, Mr. Griffin told us that now we would be able to march in and out of the building to the marches of John Philip Sousa. Sousa's band, the March King. I think there was general rejoicing in the school, but not by me. I had just lost a job that I loved to do. I figuratively turned up my nose at that music box, at John Philip Sousa, and wondered how Mr. Griffin could do this to me. I got so tired of the sameness of that King Cotton March and what was on the flip side, as we heard it about 8 times a day. In the spring of 1919, we were ready for the 8th grade graduation. Much was made of this because it would be the end of school life for many of the students. High schools were across the valley, and there were no buses. There were very few cars. Hard surfaced roads, even graded roads, were yet in the future. Ours would be Mr. Griffin's first graduating class. He spent some time consulting the students about how he would like the affair to go. The girls would have new dresses, and 1 or 2 of the girls would decide on the design of the dresses. Class colors would be chosen, and ribbon bows for everyone at the shoulder and on the diploma, who would give the class valedictory and the address to the graduates and furnish the music, etc., etc. Mr. Griffin nominated 2 students to give the valedictory address, Hazen Cooley and me. The class was to vote. I didn't have any expectations about being chosen, so I was not disappointed. But after school, Mr. Griffin asked me to stay, and he told me to prepare a paper to be given at the exercise. For me, that was more of a compliment than the valedictory. It was my teacher's vote of confidence. I have no idea who suggested the subject or the title for that paper. It must have been the teacher. but the subject was, education is the only answer to Bolshevism. I still have it, just as I wrote it, and read it the last night. When the exercises were over, Willie Griffin, whose opinions carried considerable weight in the town, as he had been away to school, and was a favorite speaker, and he came up to me, shook hands, and said, "Well, it's a good thing there were no Bolsheviks here, or they would have thrown a shoe at you." With that shoe, I finished one phase of my education and my life as I had known it in Newton for the first 14 years. In August, a Model T Ford turned the corner and drove down the street east, past Grandma's house on the left and Aunt Dora's on the right, and was about to pass me, standing in the weeds by the roadside. But the car stopped, and the driver asked if I could tell them where the Dowells lived. I pointed to a little house, and they drove on. And I ran home, anxious to know who could be coming to our house that didn't know the way. They were talking to Mama, who had just turned to me and said, "DeFonda, these folks have come to see you. This is Professor Porter, Miss Wood, and Coach Knapp from Brigham Young College." I was speechless. I stammered some kind of an answer when they asked me if I planned to come to Brigham Young College this year. And then they said goodbye and drove off, and I shrank into a nothingness too hard to bear. For the first time, I saw the house and its setting, and most of all, I saw me in that little one-piece paper doll style dress, which we always wore for every day. I was now nearly 15 years of age, small for my age, and embarrassed in the extreme. I said not a word of this, but in a few weeks I would be learning algebra from Professor Porter, and graduated forever from those paper doll dresses and the long, ribbed black cotton stockings.